So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode in our podcast. And today with us is Brian Glick. Brian has worked as a senior executive in the freight forwarding industry for many years and is now the CEO of Chain.io, a high-tech company which he also founded that provides a platform that enables companies to integrate different supply chain systems and create visibility of data. And of course, the subject of today's podcast is visibility. Hello, Brian.
Hi, thank you for having
Welcome
me.
on board. Brian, would like to share some more about yourself for our viewers before we start?
Sure, absolutely. So I come from the inside of the freight industry. I started working in the business right out of school and have been doing it about 25 years and decided to start Chain.io because I saw how much inside of freight companies and with the retailers we work with and everyone, just how much struggle there has been to make all of these systems we've invested in actually work together. And so our passion is very much around getting things done
Mm-hmm.
and delivering results as opposed to the big theory of all of these things.
Absolutely. So, as we say, we're going to talk about visibility. And, visibility or the lack of visibility is a well known problem in supply chain, in retail environments, especially after the last few years. I bet that working in the freight forwarding industry, you have witnessed the challenges created by poor visibility across the supply chain. Actually, in a report I read that Forbes issued just recently, a few days ago, they mentioned that 8 out of 10 leaders in different companies consider to invest in technology in 2023 that provides better visibility in the supply chain because it's so important. But whenever I see something that everybody understands that is important, yet it's still a struggle to do, I keep wondering why the struggle is there. Because if it's important, why we don't get it resolved? So can you elaborate why you think companies struggle to obtain visibility?
I think that there's a few big things that go into that. The first one is that moving things around the world at large volumes is actually really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems very simple when you just put two dots on a map and say, I need to take this product from Shanghai and bring it to Tel Aviv. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not on the ground. It's actually really, really hard. And there's customs and there's ships, and the ships are not reliable, and the carriers will change the schedules and so on. And do you know that the product is going to be at the factory, or that the raw materials are going to be there on time, or that there's not going to be a drought somewhere halfway around the world that means that cotton is not going to be at your factory for when they need to make the shirt? So it is an incredibly complex question. And one of the things that we talk about a lot with our customers is narrowing the scope, right? And talking about visibility of freight, or visibility of raw materials, or visibility of things that you can actually solve, and then stitching them back together to get that whole picture.
I assume that when I look at the difficulties to get visibility, I assume that some of them are technical. For example, that you have different systems with different maybe coding systems and different platforms that need to be integrated. But I guess that even when you have this uniformity or integration installed, there are still challenges to get the visibility that maybe are caused by policies like the fear of sharing information or the drive to bring down cost of reporting. How to go about these different obstacles to get visibility?
So, one of the biggest organizational barriers that we see, and this should be close to your heart, is local optimization.
Absolutely.
And departments and teams within companies are investing great amounts of money and, more importantly, energy into solving visibility locally. And then you'll see we work with large companies who have 10, 12 different data analyst teams that are all going and buying the same visibility data and trying to figure out what to do with it. But they haven't looked at the data strategy as across the end-to-end process well enough. And so there's a lot of, whenever you have this big disruption, you get people down in the trenches who go to try to solve the problem. And so you've got a lot of really good work going on inside of large organizations, but it hasn't developed into a practice yet that spans these different groups and departments. So sourcing versus
Mhm.
transportation, they're not talking to each other yet about visibility. They're trying to solve it by themselves. And once they start looking at the whole process, things will get much, much easier.
So, if I understood you correctly, you mean that we need to look at visibility almost like one important element in our strategy to have everybody aligned to it.
Yeah. So, one of the things I believe passionately, and it's part of why I started this company, is that we tend to think about software and process and all of these things very strategically. And then we think about the data and the integrations at the end. So say, I'm going to buy SAP.
Mhm.
And then at the very end of the project, go, oh my God, now I need to make it work with these three other things. As opposed to thinking about the data that's moving around our organization that can support all of these processes as a major tenant right next to the process and the ERP as a key thing. And when you bring it up to that level, you start seeing that there's infinite data around these organizations, but it's all siloed, and no one has realized that department A actually has the answer to department B's problem. We're working with a planning group right now in a large company, and they estimate like twice a year. They go, oh well, it takes us 2 weeks to get this product. And we're like, don't you know that your transportation department could give you real time visibility to whether that 2 weeks is really 1.7 weeks
Mhm.
or 14, and what the standard deviation is on that? And all of that stuff is available in your company. But because you haven't thought about this data picture holistically, you're not, you're just writing down 2 weeks in a spreadsheet and moving on.
Aha, aha,
So
correct. So, visibility is a very large word. So, if I'll break it
mhm.
down to what type of data points I want to be visible, what in your mind are the important or critical items that companies should put as a higher priority to keep visible?
so tier one to me, sort of the things that everyone, no matter this what size of company, you need to be able to answer, the key question, which is, when can I promise my customer that they can have their product? So I need to know the transportation visibility, I need my inventory visibility, and I need some signaling from whoever I'm buying my either product or raw materials from for that sort of next tier backwards. So from a retail perspective, what's the production at the factory? Are they going to be on time? Is it moving? So has it departed and has it arrived? And what's the capacity of my warehouse? Like, that's the simplest kind of three basic things. Then as you get fancier, you start saying, okay, well, let's go look at second and third tier suppliers. Let's go repeat that process for the factory and walk backwards until you're getting all the way back to raw materials. And then everything else after that, frankly, is the analytics you're doing to basically answer these basic questions of, can I meet the commitment I've made to my customer for an on-time delivery of the product that I want to sell them? And should I be able to list something for sale that I haven't produced yet because I'm confident that will be able to get it there on time? So,
Yeah.
available to promise date, I would say there's really only three things that companies, from a sourcing standpoint, it's, can I meet my available to promise date? Can I do it at a reasonable landed cost? My price to produce, and what's my environmental impact? And if I know those three things, I'm generally moving in the right
I
direction.
think, Brian, this really resonates with me because we're drowning in ocean of data, but many times we feel we don't have the information we need. And that's because information and data may not be so synonymous. My father used to say that information is the answer to the question you're asking. So first, be very clear about what are the questions that you're trying to answer. Like, when can I reliably promise the delivery to my customer? Am I going to meet this promise? Or other factors like environmental aspects, etc. What are the questions you are asking? And then derive from here the data points that you need to obtain in order to answer these questions. So I really agree with your view here.
If I can add one thing to that I think is that I see all the time being in a data integration company is, when you get to the answer, stop.
Mm-hmm.
There are so much there's so much data moving and so much data collected and so much effort going into cleaning data that doesn't make the answer to the question any better.
Absolutely.
If I'm, if I'm not a global top 10 retailer, do I really need to know, the how fuel futures are going to impact the price of my freight and all of these? Like, can I just basically say, well, what was the average price been, and project from there? So I think people sometimes get way too deep into this stuff to answer some very basic
Correct.
questions. So
And talking about doing, once you have the visibility, if you overcome all the difficulties and you know what type of data points you want, how do you take advantage of it? Because visibility alone will not bring value if you don't apply the processes that can take advantage of it. So what in your experience, what key changes companies should implement in their practices in order to take advantage of better visibility?
so I think the first thing that companies need to look at, and I'll speak specifically from a retail perspective here, is your visibility has to be tied back to your purchase orders and your SKUs. If your visibility is telling you about containers or vessels or even factories, that's not answering your business problem. And so the companies that are connecting that data back and actually making the linkage down to the purchase orders and the SKUs and the products are the ones who are then able to build the processes that do things like talking to the marketing department, which this came up a lot during the
Mhm.
port congestion, saying, you're going to need to hold that promotion because we are not going to have that product, and being able to tell them that 100 days early when they're building that promotion, not 2 weeks before when everything's already staged and ready to go. So when you tie the visibility back to the SKUs and you tie it back to those upstage manufacturing processes, then you can start reaching out to your partners in, not just the partners in inventory and fulfillment, but the partners in marketing, the partners in finance, and saying, and talking to them about their processes, and brainstorming and saying, hey, if I'm able to tell you this at this stage of your process, would you then be able to have a better decision tree, right? One of the things I've talked a lot with the US government about, is they're working to help companies with visibility, is answering questions at the right time, right? So knowing something's going to be late, you're picking someone up at the airport and they're going to be late, but they're going to be late after you've arrived at the airport is a lot different than they're going to be late before you leave your house, and you can still do things with that time. That mapping of your visibility to your partners inside the business's process is where things start getting really, really powerful.
Understood. Totally. Which bring me to final question about our subject. So, visibility or the ability to obtain visibility and then to take advantage of it can take a lot of effort for many companies, and that's why it's still an issue. So, do you view visibility as a matter only for the big businesses out there, or is it something that also smaller businesses, not the big corporation out there, can take advantage of?
I think it is actually more critical to small
Mm-hmm.
businesses than it is to large businesses. And the way I think about that is, if I move let's say I move 100,000 shipments a year and 10 of them are delayed, I'm okay. If I'm selling something and I make 4 big sales to a retailer a year, one per season, and one of those shipments is late and I lose my contract with the retailer, I'm out of business. So visibility to me is existential as a small company. What small businesses can do, instead of trying to do all of this their own, is this is where they should be relying on their freight forwarders, on their customs brokers, on the intermediaries that sit in the middle, who are working with the data providers, who are already working with the carriers. Like, you don't have to go at this by yourself. Build relationships with transportation
Mm-hmm.
professionals and let them do the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah.
For large companies, they should absolutely do it themselves and take control of their destiny. Small businesses should be using
Yeah.
really good professionals who can give them advice, in the same way that you don't file your own
Correct.
taxes.
Correct. Less R&D and more integrate what is already out there in order to bring it
Absolutely.
in home. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Brian. So I would like to conclude our podcast with the same question I'm asking all of our experts. Looking at the future of retail, what is your view, your vision in terms of how a retail industry will look like in the future?
So I've always, or I believe for the last 20 years, that we're moving in the direction of every SKU having a quantity of one, or the hyper customization of products. And on top of that, the more I see what artificial intelligence is doing, and what we're seeing with the chat GPT and the Dolly doing the images and the intelligence, is the ability for retailers to not just say, hey, I can sell you color red, blue, or orange, but who are you and what do you want, and understand your customers from a knowledge graph standpoint, and then produce products for them
Mm-hmm.
where the customer becomes the designer or is
Mm.
collaborating with the designer through these AI platforms in a way that scales. And to me, that combination of AI really being able to work at a knowledge level combined with the ability for supply chains to actually produce one of each SKU creates the ability
Custom
for
made for the
consumers
customer.
to just have an unbelievable amount of power.
Absolutely.
So,
What a view. Thank you very much, Brian. It was a pleasure to host you here. And happy
thank you.
holidays.